Imagine a show that once defined an entire generation: glamorous women walking the streets of New York in designer heels, sipping cocktails and talking openly about sex, love, and everything in between. Now picture its revival years later, with the same characters, but somehow the sparkle feels dimmer, the magic feels forced, and the city itself seems quieter. That's the story of Sex and the City. And its follow-up, and just like that, when Sex and the City first hit television screens in the late 1990s, it wasn't just a TV show, it was a cultural earthquake. At a time when women's voices were often muted in media, Carrie Bradshaw and her friends dared to speak loudly, honestly, and unapologetically. They spoke about pleasure, heartbreak, ambition, and independence. For many viewers, this wasn't just entertainment. It was a mirror held up to modern womanhood. It was bold, it was fresh, and it was unforgettable. The show became more than weekly episodes. It became a movement. People copied the fashion, the lifestyle, even the conversations. Suddenly, it was normal to talk about taboo topics like casual relationships or the messy realities of dating. It was normal to see women not as side characters in a man's world, but as the center of their own story. That's the magic Sex. And the City captured friendship, freedom, and fearless honesty. So when HBO announced, and just like that, the excitement was enormous. Fans wanted to reconnect with Carrie, Miranda, and Charlotte, to see how these women had grown, to relive that same energy in a new era. The expectation was simple: bring back the spark, yet what we got felt very different. Instead of the confident stride of women owning their lives, we were met with hesitation, awkward storytelling, and a strange lack of joy. The revival didn't just age the characters. It aged the spirit of the show itself. This raises the question at the heart of our story. How did a series that once set trends and broke barriers lose the very essence that made it iconic? Why does And Just Like That feel so disconnected from the world it's supposed to continue? And most importantly, what lessons can we learn from its stumble? To answer that, we first need to understand what made the original series so magical in the first place. Before we can see where things went wrong, we have to go back to the nights in Manhattan where it all began. When four women turned dating and friendship into a revolution, what made Sex and the City so magnetic wasn't just the shoes or the cocktails or even the city skyline. It was the feeling that these four women were living lives that were both extraordinary and relatable at the same time. They were bold enough to wear couture down cobblestone streets, yet vulnerable enough to cry over unanswered phone calls. That balance, the glitter and the grit, was the beating heart of the show. At its core, the series was about friendship. Carrie, Miranda, Charlotte, and Samantha weren't perfect. They clashed, they judged each other, and they sometimes made terrible choices. But through every heartbreak, every career twist, every awkward dinner party, they circled back to one another. The brunch table became their safe haven, a space where the outside world's pressures could be broken down into laughter, tears, and often a brutally honest punchline. That ritual, the sacred New York brunch, became just as iconic as Carrie's closet. It wasn't about food, it was about survival, about women holding each other up in a city that could chew you up and spit you out. The show also dared to go where television rarely ventured. In the late 90s, female sexuality was still wrapped in shame and silence. But Sex and the City turned that silence into conversation. Each character embodied a different perspective on intimacy. Samantha's unapologetic pursuit of pleasure, Miranda's sharp pragmatism, Charlotte's romantic ideals, and Carrie's search for meaning in the chaos of it all. Together they created a mosaic of modern womanhood. They weren't archetypes to be boxed in, they were evolving, complicated, and real, but the genius of the writing was its balance. For every shocking sex scene that pushed boundaries, there was a moment of quiet vulnerability that reminded us these women weren't superheroes. They were just as scared of rejection, just as desperate for love, and just as confused about life as the rest of us. The humor softened the blows of heartbreak, and the heartbreak gave weight to the humor. That rhythm was intoxicating. And then, of course, there was New York itself. The city wasn't just a backdrop, it was a fifth character. Every street corner, every rooftop, every yellow cab added to the atmosphere. The city was alive, chaotic, and unpredictable, just like the lives of the women who lived in it. It gave the show its pulse, its energy, its constant sense of possibility. Viewers around the world didn't just want Carrie's shoes, they wanted her city. They wanted to feel what it was like to walk through Manhattan, armed with confidence. Girlfriends and the promise of adventure. Fashion also played its role as silent storytelling. Each outfit was more than fabric, it was character development. Carrie's fearless experiments, Miranda's evolving practicality, Charlotte's polished elegance, Samantha's unapologetic boldness. Their wardrobe spoke before they did. When Carrie walked into a room wearing a tutu in the opening credits, it wasn't just quirky style, it was a manifesto. This show would not play by the rules. Most importantly, Sex and the City arrived at the perfect cultural moment. The late 90s and early 2000s were a turning point. Feminism was gaining mainstream traction. Conversations about relationships were shifting, and TV itself was beginning to experiment with edgier, more adult themes. Sex and the City became the lightning rod for all of it. It gave women permission to talk openly about their lives in a way that was previously off-limits. It gave audiences, women and men alike, stories that reflected the messy, funny, and heartbreaking reality of trying to find love and happiness in a rapidly changing world. That's why the show wasn't just popular. It was revolutionary. It wasn't trying to teach lessons or check boxes. It was trying to tell the truth, and in doing so, it became timeless. Even today, reruns of Sex and the City still resonate. The jokes still land. The heartbreak still stings. The magic remains because it was never about trends or politics, it was about human connection, and this is where the problem begins. Because when And Just Like That returned years later, it tried to modernize the formula. But instead of building on that original foundation of honesty and friendship, it buried itself under forced relevance and heavy-handed lessons. It forgot that what made Sex and the City magical wasn't the fashion or the shock value, it was the heart. Before we can fully understand where And Just Like That stumbled, we need to look closer at the ways it strayed from this original magic. Because once you see the contrast, the difference becomes impossible to ignore. When And Just Like That finally arrived, it promised nostalgia wrapped in a fresh new package. Fans were eager to see old friends, to step once again into Carrie's apartment, to hear the click of high heels against New York sidewalks. But almost immediately, something felt off. It wasn't just that the women were older, it was that the spirit of the show itself had shifted. Instead of the playful confidence that once defined Sex and the City, the revival felt cautious, self-conscious, and strangely joyless. One of the biggest issues was tone. The original series was fearless. It spoke about sex with humor and wit, even when things got messy or awkward. But And Just Like That often approached intimacy with hesitation, almost as if it was afraid to offend. Instead of breaking taboos, the show tiptoed around them, relying more on awkward dialogue than bold storytelling. The result was a series that felt more like a lecture than a conversation, more like a checklist than a story. The fun had evaporated. Then there were the characters themselves. Carrie, once the voice of curiosity and romance, now often felt distant, as though she was a guest star in her own life. Miranda, the fiercely independent career woman, was suddenly written into an arc that felt forced and inconsistent with her established personality. Charlotte, once the idealistic romantic, now seemed reduced to clichés about motherhood and privilege. The women who once embodied complexity had been flattened into caricatures of themselves. Instead of growing naturally, they were bent and reshaped to fit a modern script that didn't suit them. And of course, the absence of Samantha Jones loomed large. Samantha was the bold, fearless counterbalance to the other three women, the one who said what no one else dared to say. Without her, the dynamic of the group felt incomplete. The brunch table, once alive with contrasting voices, now felt hollow. The show tried to explain her absence with off-screen drama. But no storyline could fill the void left by her energy. The series also struggled with representation. On paper, adding new, diverse characters should have been a strength. It was a chance to reflect the real New York and tell fresh stories. But instead of weaving these characters seamlessly into the fabric of the show, they often felt like add-ons, placed there to tick boxes rather than to truly enrich the narrative. Diversity without depth became tokenism, and audiences noticed. These new characters weren't given the same care, humor, or depth as the originals, making their presence feel performative rather than authentic. Even New York itself seemed diminished. In the original series, the city was alive, bright, chaotic, romantic, and unpredictable. And just like that, the city feels muted, like a backdrop rather than a character. The energy of late-night adventures, spontaneous encounters, and messy city living has been replaced by quieter, more sterile settings. It's as if the show lost its love affair with New York, the very heartbeat that once made it irresistible. The fashion, too, lost some of its edge. Carrie's outfits once told stories, daring and playful, mixing thrift store finds with designer treasures. In the revival, the fashion often feels exaggerated, more like a costume than a reflection of character. Instead of signaling individuality and rebellion, it sometimes feels disconnected from the women wearing it. The clothes still draw attention, but they rarely carry the same narrative weight. All of this created a deeper problem. The revival forgot what made the original resonate. Sex and the City worked because it felt authentic. It was messy, yes, but it was real. It spoke to universal experiences with honesty, humor, and vulnerability. And just like that often feels like it's trying too hard to be relevant, trying too hard to impress, trying too hard to modernize. And when a show is trying that hard, the audience can feel it. What made the original special wasn't just that it reflected its time, it reflected real emotions. It laughed at heartbreak. It turned awkwardness into comedy, and it celebrated friendship above all else. But the revival, instead of building on those timeless themes, weighed itself down with self-awareness and moralizing. It forgot to have fun. It forgot to be brave. It forgot to be honest, and that's the tragedy. Because the revival had everything. Going for it. Beloved characters, a loyal fan base, a city full of stories waiting to be told. But somewhere along the way, it traded authenticity for agenda, character for commentary, and joy for seriousness. The result was a show that looked like Sex and the City on the outside, but didn't feel like it on the inside. The magic wasn't lost because the women got older. Aging doesn't erase storytelling. The magic was lost because the heart of the show, friendship, honesty, and joy, was replaced with something colder, something calculated. And once that spark is gone, even the most glamorous shoes can't hide it. Asterisk, the story of Sex and the City and just like that is more than the tale of two TV shows. It's a reminder of how fragile magic can be and how difficult it is to recapture once it's gone. The original series thrived because it was bold, messy, and real. It didn't try to be perfect. It tried to be honest. And honesty, wrapped in humor and friendship, is what made it timeless. And just like that, serves as a cautionary tale. It shows us what happens when storytelling loses sight of its own heart. Instead of focusing on the lived experiences of its characters, it became tangled in self-awareness, eager to update itself for a modern audience without asking the most important question: what made this story worth telling in the first place? Without that anchor, the revival drifted away from its soul. The truth is, audiences don't need a show to be politically correct or fashionable or perfectly aligned with cultural trends. What they need is connection. They want to laugh at situations that feel familiar, to cry at heartbreaks that sting like their own, to root for friends who make mistakes but always come back together. They want the raw, unpolished reality of human experience, even when it's uncomfortable. Sex and the City gave us that. And just like that often did not, there's also a deeper lesson here about nostalgia. We often think that bringing something back will recreate the feeling it once gave us. We imagine that if the characters return, the city skyline shines again, and the theme music plays, the spark will reignite. But nostalgia can be tricky. It can cloud our vision, making us forget that stories are living things. They belong to a time, a place, and a cultural moment. And sometimes trying to stretch them into the present only highlights how much that moment has passed. Yet, this doesn't mean revisiting old stories is always doomed. It means revivals must evolve with authenticity. They must respect the past, without becoming trapped by it. They must add new layers instead of sanding down the old ones. And most importantly, they must stay true to the emotional truths that made audiences fall in love in the first place. Without that, revivals risk becoming hollow echoes, familiar in form but empty in feeling. And just like that, the lesson is clear: fashion and nostalgia alone cannot carry a story. A designer dress means nothing if the character wearing it feels like a stranger. A city skyline is just background if the friendships at its center feel forced. A revival has to offer more than recognition. It has to offer resonance, but there is one final reflection that's worth holding on to. While the revival may have stumbled, it doesn't erase the brilliance of what came before. Sex and the City remains a milestone in television history, a series that gave women permission to speak, to desire, to dream, and to demand space in a cultural landscape that often ignored them. That legacy is untouchable. No imperfect revival can take away the groundbreaking impact of the original, and perhaps that's where the magic truly lies. Not in trying to recreate the past, but in remembering it. In holding on to the way it made us feel when we first watched Carrie dash down the street in her Manolos, or when the four friends clinked glasses and toasted to one another, promising that no matter what, they'd face the world together. Those moments are immortal, etched into pop culture and into the hearts of viewers forever. So maybe the real lesson of And Just Like That is this: some stories don't need to be continued. Some stories are already complete. Their magic isn't meant to be repeated, it's meant to be remembered. And just like that, the past remains golden, not because it lasted forever, but because it shined so brightly when it was here.